Greetings, everyone. Well, tonight I would like to start what could be a series of Star Wars wisdom and how I make my Christian religious connection to it. Part of what makes Star Wars so universally relevant for people and how they connect to it is that people might connect by character. Maybe they see themselves in Luke, or they see themselves in Han, or they're inspired by Leia or Padme, or they are intrigued by the wisdom of Yoda or Qui-Gon or Obi-Wan, or they like the action of it or the fantastical part. So whatever it is, there's a lot that people gravitate toward and a lot that intrigues them. One of the things that intrigues me is how the Force is used. And in Star Wars, the Force is kind of a conglomeration of different religious systems, so that way um, it doesn't lean too heavily towards one or the other. I know there's a lot of maybe Eastern philosophy of like yin yang and stuff like that. Or phrases like empty your mind or things like that, clear your mind, things like that. But, there's still this idea of good versus evil, of balance, all this idea of balance of life and how you relate to people, how you relate to the world, and how you relate to the higher power. And so it always intrigued me in my Christian faith because I saw a lot of parallels. I saw a lot of things that, it's like, oh yeah, this kind of makes me think of this from the Bible, or this that I know of. And so it's not going to be exhaustive. This is going to be long enough as it is. But anyway, this is Star Wars wisdom and how I make a Christian connection to it. And I want to focus particularly on a couple quotes of Qui-Gon. What I did was, at some point, and sadly I didn't make references as to where it was, but especially when I was in high school and I was reading high school and early college, when I was reading a lot of the expanded universe novels, there was just a lot of good quotes by different people, things that just stuck out to me, and I wrote them down in a Word document file, and I called it the Holocron. And it was kind of my way of finding these quotes that were interesting to me and something I thought, ooh, this could point me in this idea. It makes me think of this. It points me to God in this sort of way. So this is a quote from Qui-Gon, and I think it's from Episode 1, novelization. He says, "There are secrets in the Force that are not easily discovered. The Force is vast and pervasive, and all living things are a part of it. It is not always apparent what that purpose is, however. Sometimes that purpose must first be sensed in order that it may be revealed later." Something like that. So, the idea is that things are not always at face value. That there's something deeper going on, and you may not know what the outcome of it is going to be right away, but there's something more. Yeah, there's something more to it, and its resolution may come later. And if you open your mind to it and allow yourself to be open to the possibilities that the Force is trying to push you towards, being that the Force has sort of a will, it's something that you may find out later of what's going on. Now, Qui-Gon saw value in both Jar Jar and Anakin in Phantom Menace. See, Qui-Gon was compassionate. His awareness of the living Force helped him to see how things interconnected, even if it was only in part. Of course, he didn't understand everything as it was happening. He's kind of trying to stumble his way through it and figure out what it's going, but he is acting in faith that the Force will guide. Don't worry, the Force will guide us. Oh, Maxie, big the Force. Okay. So, nothing happens by accident. A big quote. Nothing happens by accident. That's a huge one. So, Qui-Gon believed in the will of the Force, and he was mindful of life around him. even if other Jedi didn't, subscribe to that mentality. His sort of maverick mind of the living force and compassion and not sticking quite to the code kind of kept him maybe not necessarily at odds, but in not completely jiving with the Jedi Council. That's why he was never on the council. He never took a seat there, because he couldn't restrict himself to the code that had been developed over years, because he wanted to be more organic, and he was kind of more gracious in that aspect. Not that he was necessarily saying that the council was wrong. It's just that he had a different view of life that allowed for things beyond it. I'm trying to say this. The Jedi Code was developed over years with the idea of knowing what happens if you succumb to the dark side or you give it an opening. And so in that sense, it's kind of an absolutist idea. Yeah, the Sith absolutes, no. I still don't like that line. There's just one word missing in there, in that line. Only a Sith deals in such absolutes. But anyway, so Qui-Gon was just more, he was different. So, considering that Qui-Gon was a little bit more organic in his understanding of how the Force worked, consider that had Jar Jar not been banished, just going through episode 1 here, had Jar Jar not been banished, the Gungans would have never learned of the Trade Federation threat, and ultimately, Jar Jar would never have been a key part in the Nubians' reunification of humans and Gungans coming together. Had the Queen's ship not taken damage in its flight from Naboo and been forced to land on Tatooine, Qui-Gon would have never walked into the door of a junk dealer named Watto in a city called Mos Espa. And had not Qui-Gon the compassion and perceptive heart that he did, he would have never thought to consider that a random, friendly boy was the chosen one, in plain sight before him. Obi-Wan would later say, "In my experience, there was no such thing as luck." He was speaking of how there is no random chaotic chance, but instead all things are connected in the Force. Now, using this as the preface, the kind of jumping off point, I would use this cause-based logic to even consider our state of being, or use it as a story which allows us to think about our state of being. See, I don't believe in good, bad, or random luck. See, I don't even believe in karma or fortune, although Chinese fortunes are really fun to read. Sometimes those translations are amusing. Everything has a cause and a reason. We were born not of our own doing. We had nothing to do with it, but we were born because of those who came before. These are like kind of random ideas of butterfly effects that happens. Someone took a job. Someone grew up in a very peculiar circumstance. Someone bucked tradition. Someone fell in love. Someone saved a life. Someone made a breakthrough discovery. Someone made an invention. Someone kept cool under pressure. YouTube's algorithms showed you my video while you scrolled. I even decided to sit down and type up this script of my thoughts here to make sure that I, didn't miss anything that I wanted to say, so I could keep on track as best as possible. Isn't it amazing just to realize how this particular circumstance has occurred? That someone deduced the practical value of metal and petroleum to make wires, circuits, cables, silicone, glass, and plastic, which eventually lead to the computer or phone that you're using now to watch this video with. That you have considered that you have the senses of sight and sound to perceive me and my message to you. that I was born where I was, when I was, and I had an education, that I learned to read and write, and I had access to Star Wars on videotape from a TV broadcast growing up. We had it on tape, record off TV. Consider that you're even interested in this topic at all, and that there is electricity to power the servers which store and transmit lightning-fast streams of data, possibly between continents. That these resources are found on this particular planet in abundance enough that we have enough devices, and probably more so in excess, for every human to own several in their lifetime. And that by chemical and physical processes we can recycle most of these resources to make new ones again. That we have the brains and the bodies and the wherewithal to harness the earth and the resources to make new again. Or to harness and create tools and processes to manufacture these devices. And that all the observed laws of nature and the properties of matter are consistent and stable enough to be relied upon without a second thought, commercially or personally or medically. We just kind of rely on this stuff, as if we take it for granted. That we happen to live on this earth, which is perfect in most every aspect in its suitability for human life. And that we're adaptable enough to manage or manipulate less than hospitable environments to our advantage. And that this earth is just the right distance from the sun, being just the right size, the sun and that sun being just the right size and intensity. And we have just the right size of moon. And we're all moving at just the right speed, and all of these celestial bodies being just the correct size to have the proper amount of gravity. That all of this is even real. Just consider and allow your mind to be blown at all of these things that we take for granted, as if either we had something to do with it of completely our own strength from the beginning, or that it was just by happenstance, random happenstance. That all of these things are even done is about the same probability of trying to solve a 100-piece puzzle with the pieces upside down and get it correctly. See, all of these things, to me, point to what we call the providence of God. The providence means that God is working on our behalf in our lives before we are even aware of it. And to me, that starts with creation of the world, the foundation of the world and the laws of nature and physics and everything that happens in that. And all of our family history, all of world history, everything that has happened is a butterfly effect that happens the next thing. Now, I want to open you up to a couple stories from the Bible that also reference this idea of providence, the providence of God, and that even things that we think may happen beyond his control, we may find out are really not even out of his control. This story, I don't know if you've ever heard of Joseph before, but in the first book of the Bible, Genesis, Joseph is one of the sons of Jacob, who is also called Israel. Yes, Israel. And he was sold in slavery to his brothers because his brothers were jealous of him. They were envious of him, the attention that he was getting. I mean, he was a little bit of a brat. He didn't really help himself out. But he suffered many undue difficulties in his life. He was sold off into slavery by his own brothers, and he was falsely accused of crimes that he did not commit. But through all these things, he remained faithful to God, and he found out that he and his talents, which his brothers hated him for anyway, the talents that God gave him and his willingness to be used by God unbegrudgingly allowed him to basically save saved the world, really. There was a famine at that time, and he was brought to the attention of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh, because of the wisdom that God had given him to tell him what to do, Pharaoh made him second in command of all Egypt, basically. And Joseph's brothers, being from Israel, came to Egypt looking for grain, for food that Joseph had the forethought to make sure that they gathered up enough so they would have some in excess to weather those years of famine that were upcoming, that he'd been told by God, or that the Pharaoh had been warned by God in a dream. And so his brothers are there, and they don't realize that this is Joseph standing in front of him. So we're picking up at this spot. It's in Genesis 45, and I'm reading from the New Living Translation because I just like how that reads better. Finally, Joseph, he couldn't stand it any longer, what was happening to him, and he broke down and said, "I am Joseph," he said to his brothers. "Is my father still alive?" But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. "Please come closer," he said to them. So they came closer, and he said again, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery. But don't be upset, and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. This famine that has ravaged the land for 2 years will last 5 more years, and there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God has sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive and preserve many survivors. So it was God who sent me here, not you. And he is the one who made me an advisor to Pharaoh, the manager of his entire palace, and the governor of all Egypt." So Joseph credits God for being in charge of the entire thing, even basically planning his unfortunate circumstance. That's how Joseph sees it here. Now, this does kind of open up the painful question here, so we kind of have to address this a little. It opens up the painful question of, why do bad things happen to good people, or even at all? Now, Joseph credits what happens to him as being part of God's plan, that God knew about it, that he even ordained it so that Joseph, being faithful, would turn it around, surrender it to God, and allow people to survive this famine that was upcoming, that God was warning them this was going to happen. He told them of this great prosperity that would come, and then this great famine that would follow. He was warning them. Now, some might ask, well, why didn't God just stop the famine in the first place? But I don't know. Part of me feels like that's kind of a trolling question. I'll kind of reference sort of why not, at least what my understanding of why not. Okay, so why do bad things happen to good people, or even at all? Let's kind of come back to Star Wars here. Why did Anakin have to be born a slave? Why was Jar Jar predisposed to clumsiness? Why were there Sith? Why did the Clone Wars have to rage across the galaxy? Why were the Jedi cast as villains and traitors, and the Galactic Empire ushered in place of the Republic? Now, in these cases, I would say that the nature of the dark side is the grasp of power, particularly at the expense of others. Sidious believed that the weak were destined to be controlled, and that it was the right of the Sith to control them. The dark side user forces unnatural changes in the world, whether those changes are viewed as evil or benevolent. Anakin was trying to save Padme, and so he was forcing unnatural changes to the galaxy, really. The dark side disrupts the universe. It is in the nature of evil to destroy. And I don't believe that it's in the will of the Force to be contorted or twisted or perverted into the dark side. By destroying life, it destroys the Force, and because the Force is made of life. And disrupting its balance is like disrupting any ecosystem. The consequences can be ravaging, if not fatal. Now, for us, the idea of evil can be thought of as the illustration of cold. I always like allegory or metaphor. I always like metaphorical illustrations. So think of cold. There actually is no such thing as cold. Because if we think of energy, heat is a form of energy. Heat is created by vibrations. Heat is it's an energy, a radiation. And all we do is we use the word cold to describe when there is no heat. So cold isn't a thing. It's not an energy. It is simply the lack of energy, the lack of heat. And so if we think that as cold as the absence of heat, we can use this as an idea to describe that evil is the absence, or the not less the absence, but the forsaking of God in order to pursue harmful or hurtful or selfish or perverse ways of control, whether it be over people or simply over our own circumstances. And so evil, so that's kind of the idea, is that I would say that evil doesn't come from God. Now, God is big enough that he can actually use it, if it happens, that he can manipulate the evil of other people. He's not bound to... See, the thing is, God's ways are higher than our ways, and so even my feeble attempts to try to describe him will fail. And I'm not saying that as a cop-out. I'm saying that it's hard to really grasp it. We can only grasp it in shades, like we see through a mirror dimly, So it's the idea that just finding my train of thought here again. The idea that it's us trying to do things outside of God's realm. Now, so in this sense of feeling the cold from other people or not feeling heat from other people, evil can come from other people. That's one reason of why evil happens in this world, is because we're in a world of other people who all are flawed and sinful. Some of us may feel that we are less than others, but regardless, we all do wrong things at some time or another, and those wrong things affect each other. Just like knocking over a coffee cup, it spills over onto other things. So evil comes from other people. But we also believe, Christians believe, and Jesus confirmed this is part of why we believe it, is that God himself has an enemy who was exiled from heaven. He was known as Lucifer in heaven, the kind of the angel of light. But he's known now as Satan, meaning adversary. He and his demonic host are at work in all kinds of ways, whether it be subtle and gradual or deliberate and dramatic, like the workings of the Sith, culminating with Sidious and Vader working behind the scenes, and then all of a sudden here it is, big evil things are happening, Anyone watch the news recently? So also to be mentioned is that because we have a free will as God, this is a separate thought, we have a free will as God does. That's part of what it is to be made in his image and likeness, is that we have intelligence as God does. We have free thought, free will. Because of this, God allows us to make our own choices. He did not make us robots that we're forced to obey him, or else there's no point. There's no point to being human and having a soul and intelligence if we cannot use that. That's part of life. Now, this means that we sometimes make bad choices, even if we know better. Often we are our own worst enemy, like Luke's vision in the dark side cave on Dagobah. Now, all of this idea of evil does not render God helpless. Like I already said, God is bigger than our problems and our meddling. He's beyond that. He can use that to his own will because of his foreknowledge and because he is God. And he is a God who understands suffering, human suffering. Jesus lived fully human and yet fully God. God invites us to participate in this redemption process of healing and helping others, and receiving his grace and mercy for ourselves into our own lives, for our personal reconciliation with God. And I believe, here's the kicker, I believe that God can take any situation, good or evil, happy or sad, just or unfair, and if we surrender it to him, he can make something glorious out of it. And he invites us to do that. I want to take you to the 5th chapter of Paul's letter to the Roman church. He says, "Therefore, since we have been made right in God's sight by faith, by believing in him, we have peace with God. Because of what, we're not enemies with God. We are at peace with God because of what Jesus Christ our Lord has done for us. Because of our faith, Christ has brought us into this place of undeserved privilege where we now stand. And we confidently and joyfully look forward to sharing God's glory." This is God wanting us to participate in it, even though we have no business doing it by all rights, because of humanity's rebellion in the Garden of Eden. Going on, "We can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us," he's speaking of the Christians, he's speaking to the church members, "they help us develop endurance. And endurance develops strength of character, and character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. And this hope will not lead to disappointment, for we know how dearly God loves us, because he has given us the Holy Spirit to fill our hearts with his love. Here's the big thing, when we were utterly helpless, Christ came at just the right time and died for us sinners." So see, Paul was speaking to the Christians in Rome and through all that letter, but this last point applies to everyone. Listen to it again. When we were utterly helpless, Christ came at just the right time and died for us sinners. Kind of like Qui-Gon coming in at just the right time and finding Jar Jar and finding Anakin and all of this, you know. So all things worked together in our life. History, economy, religion, politics, prophecy, all of these things work together to bring about God's reconciliation with mankind through Jesus Christ. Listen again to Qui-Gon's quote here. "There are secrets hidden in the Force that are not easily discovered. The Force is vast and pervasive, and all living things are a part of it. But it's not always apparent what their purpose is, however. Sometimes that purpose must be sensed first, in order that it may be revealed later." I want to take you to the letter of James, the brother of Jesus himself. He wrote, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow." Opportunities for growth. "For you know that when your faith is tested," I just said that your endurance has a chance to grow. "So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking." Now, I'm going to bring it back to Star Wars to start to wrap this thing up here. Anakin had been trapped in the armor of Darth Vader for years. And he is vengeful, hateful, and powerful. He has been surrendered to the dark side hopelessly, which is why he says, "It is too late for me, son." It's that pitiful, helpless feeling of, I know what you're trying to do, but it's not going to work. That is a glimpse of Anakin. A glimpse of Anakin right there, saying, "It's too late for me. I've been surrendered to the dark side too long. There's no redemption for me." And we've seen other glimpses of Anakin too. Like when he is met with Ahsoka, or when he held Ahsoka's lightsaber. And there are other like comic book references that I don't know because I don't buy the comics, of moments when their Anakin shines through for just a little bit. Because Anakin is a fighter, and even though he's been defeated by the dark side, there's still glimpses there. Now, because of the love of his son, Luke, and Luke's training by Obi-Wan and Yoda, who had also been trained by Qui-Gon to commune with the living after death. Because of all of this that had happened before, Luke Skywalker is the redemptive factor that causes Anakin Skywalker to say, enough. Okay, well, actually what he said was, no. No! Something like that. He casts off the shackles of Darth Vader, and he fulfills his destiny to restore the balance of the Force by destroying Palpatine and ushering the defeat of his empire, an empire which was 1,000 years in the making. Nothing happens by accident. So, in conclusion here, for my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, remember to be in prayer regarding troubling times and discouraging circumstances. God is greater than our difficulties. He wants us to participate in its resolution, but it may require patience and persistence. Remember that Jesus was human too. And so he is our sympathetic high priest who brings our requests to God as we feebly maintain our relationship with him in earnest. And to those who don't believe, for whatever reason, just consider the idea, humor me, consider the idea that life is beyond our physical senses and our mental, emotional processes. And even just consider the amazingness, sure, why not? The amazingness that we have our physical bodies and our mental and emotional processes. Consider the staggering realization of how much had to happen for you to be here, watching me right now. And I challenge you, don't take it lightly. Don't take it for granted. Consider that God is allowing this moment for you to reach out to him. We're never guaranteed another chance again. So, this is my first in a possible series of lessons from the Force. And the idea is to study or to bring out a few lines, connected lines from one or two Jedi, and kind of expound upon that and provide some Bible references that I use to help me understand God better and maybe bring you a better understanding of God better. So I hope that this is insightful for you, enjoyable for you, and yeah, I wish you well. I wish you good health, and I hope this does well for you. So, as always, may the Force be with you.